if I have really noticeable dysfunctions or whatever we've talked about in our appointment, I have these asymmetries that I'm working around. Should I not work out? What do you say?
I would say definitely keep moving, keep working out, keep doing this stuff for a couple of reasons. And the shoulder blade example, or like the shoulders moving around, she asked a follow-up question a while ago. It's like, well, now that you pointed it out to me, it's kind of a splinter in my mind. I can't not think about it. Should I not go on walks anymore? Because I don't want to feed that compensation pattern, right? I'm like, I don't want to scare her.
Right.
But that movement is a big, big part of working on these different imbalances, especially after you do your menu.
Yeah.
Right? So like the menu, the way I like to think of the menu too is a primer for those muscles throughout your day. Mm-hmm. You're specifically targeting certain muscles to work out these imbalances so that when you do go throughout your day, those muscles have an opportunity to work throughout the rest of the 10, 18 hours, however long that we're awake for, right?
Yeah.
So and I'm sure you agree with this, you'd be hard pressed to find someone in perfect postural alignment in the world these days.
Hard pressed indeed.
Yes. Because not because it's not possible, but because the stresses of our daily life, daily society.
Yeah, and our environment is impacting this. Yes.
Exactly. So by that kind of thinking, no one should be exercising or moving because we all have these different dysfunctions and compensations, every single person on this earth.
Totally. Yeah. And so it's not needing to be perfect. It's just needing to be closer to functional. Mm-hmm. And you'll notice that your workouts change and what you're experiencing in your workouts are going to change as the posture of you changes. If you find yourself with your workouts, and this is a telltale sign for me where I'm like, I didn't do a menu today. If I'm doing some kind of weight training and like I totally feel my right glute, but I have a hard time engaging my left glute, probably a sign that you're rotated or a sign that your pelvis is in a tilt disparity. And like with the awareness and with the knowledge and the tools of, okay, we know our menus can help us with that. The next time you go do your workout, it'll probably be a very different experience. I can absolutely attest to that. And then I'm like, oh, there's my left glute, right? So unless there are occasions, and I say it's more rare than common. There are occasions where if someone is really symptomatic and dysfunctional, there might be a time where we're like, let's take a few weeks off of this to correct and really dive into this pattern and undo it, so that we're not being counterproductive. You know what I mean? But our goal is to help you get back to movement and to get to doing all the things you want to do. The goal is not to make your world smaller, it's to make your world bigger. So unless there is really something where it's like, okay, let's take a pause on this for a few weeks so that this is the desired outcome, whether it's we need to make sure your shoulder isn't frozen before you're doing, like before you swim. But no, like staying active, walking, and the forgotten joint can end up being, aside from the ankles, can be the shoulders, because if we're sitting all day and then we go for a walk, but we're not doing anything else, like how often are you raising your arms up over your head? Or now that we have backup cameras, to Pete Egoscue's point, like how often are we actually rotating in our car? Like our trunk is meant to move, it's meant to rotate, and it can get very easy for the shoulders to lose mobility the tighter our hips get. So please keep working out so that you don't lose these function and range of motion.
I wonder if he's going to put that blurb about the backup cameras in the new edition of the book.
Oh, yeah, right? Also, wildly helpful. I do have to say, I'm so grateful for my backup camera, because sometimes these bicyclists just like dart out of nowhere. But when I'm backing up, I'll use my backup camera, but I'll still turn.
Oh yeah.
Because I don't want to lose that. And I also, like, what if you're renting a car that doesn't have a camera?
Mm-hmm. It's going to be habit. You'll be able to, you'll know the people who have grown up with backup cameras because they'll never move. Meanwhile, I'll be in the passenger seat. I'll be freaking out. Be like, you can't see anything. You don't
Yeah. Yeah. So have there been times where you've been like, let's wait on the working out for a little bit, or let's pause on this?
It's funny. I
Okay.
was going to ask you the same exact thing.
Yeah.
Um, cer-
Yeah, no, please go.
I was going to say certainly I've had some people who are higher activity wise, like whether they're doing CrossFit or like they're really trying to stay in shape, very, very, very tight in their upper back to the point where they can't really move their shoulders. But a lot of CrossFit has to do with overhead movements, overhead squats. They might be doing some bench pressing or some push-ups.
Yeah.
So in those instances, especially if they've got a lot of pain going on, be like, you know what, it might be best to hold off, because if you can't get this proper range of
Yeah.
motion,
Yeah,
you're going to
exactly.
hinge in your back.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, and this is actually everyone listening, this is actually not at all a blast on CrossFit, but more a
Not at
way
all.
to make sure that your people are staying in your gyms when these open up again, or your outdoor spaces. Because I work with, we work with several CrossFit athletes, and they love the workout. There's nothing wrong with the workout. We have to make sure that, to your point, your thoracic spine is mobile so you can get that full range of motion, and that your hips are functional so you can be hip driven with your squats, your deadlifts, your snatches, etc. Because in the absence of that function, what do we rely on? Momentum,
Yep.
speed, and momentum, right? Compensation patterns, and then it beats you up, right? I did have someone who, like, huge CrossFit enthusiast, and but she also was dealing with a lot of neck pain, and then opposite SI joint pain, and doing her menus and doing like low impact exercise, especially because of how intense her neck symptom was. We were like, let's pause on CrossFit for just like a few weeks to get you out of symptom. Because if we're doing a menu and then you're going to work out the next day, we haven't spent enough time to offset this compensation pattern, this habit. And athletes are great compensators, right? You're going to do whatever you can to make a motion happen. This is true for like any kind of athlete, right? Dancers included, musicians, like anything, right? So sadly, one menu is not going to undo years of compensatory habits, if
Nope.
only. So those are the times where, to your point, it would be like, let's take a pause, really make sure that if you're symptomatic, you're in a stable place where you're not dealing with pain and you're functioning a little bit better, and then we can get you back to that. And then you're going to have a very different experience with your workouts.
Mhm.
You might even make different choices,
In
like in
terms of
terms of
like,
what you're choosing, like different choices in terms of what you're choosing. That did not clarify anything. Like maybe, when you're trying to do as many reps as possible, now that up, I feel that I'm going into my compensation pattern again. Maybe ego is not going to win this time. Like, you might not be like, well, just pump them out, because then you start to realize, okay, I'm using my neck. I'm going to slow down. But you're a more intelligent mover as a result.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
like quality, you'll choose quality over quantity.
So that's a great point, and allowing people to give them permission to listen to what their body's telling them. I mean, I feel like pretty often we're told that you gotta push through the pain, just tough it out, it'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that pain signal is there for a reason. It's serving a very distinct and important purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Mm-hmm.
we disregard those signals, years down the road, there's going to be something that's happening. Like, man, if only I'd listened to how I was feeling, I probably should have just taken that week off.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of intelligence, because of the exact thing that you just said. So that's what I meant by choosing different choices, and being a more intelligent. What do you
This
mean
is
by choose differently? I would make different choices.
yeah, right.
Cool. That was helpful. But yeah, so those are the rare times. But I mean, at minimum, like going for a walk, doing the exercises that do feel good, or not needing to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you're like, oh well, in the meantime, if this is happening, should I not do yoga? Well, maybe do yoga, but if a certain twisting pose aggravates you, opt out of it. You
Hmm.
can still do yoga. It doesn't have to be like totally extract this from your life.
Right, exactly. And again, like to circle back to what you had said before, Emily, the goal of the therapy is to expand your world. Like this temporary cease of movement or of this activity is not going to be a permanent thing, until you reach this milestone of your posture, whether it is, oh yeah, now I can bring my hands all the way to the floor, or I feel like my weight is more evenly distributed when I stand. I think that's be a good opportunity for me to start squatting again. Like all these different things, test, retest. It's what it's all about to make sure that, oh yeah, that's safe for me to progress.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. There's there's one more question from Anna, and I would love the participation. I want to make sure we answer, or I'm understanding the question. It says sitting exercises for people with anterior pelvic tilt often have that arch in their lower back. Maybe she means if their pelvis is anterior, they often have an arch already.
Right.
Why is working on hip flexors important?
From what I understand, at least from what I survived from the description, if someone's already anteriorly tilted, I think the assumption is that those hip flexors are already in a shortened position.
Perhaps like why work on them?
Yeah, they're pretty strong, so it's already diving the hip forward. Why do we want to encourage that more?
Okay, right? Yeah, fair enough. So with the sitting position that we talk about with rolling the hips forward, it is rolling relatively anterior because we are going forward from a relatively posterior position. The movement forward for most slouchers, the movement forward is actually to help you achieve a more neutral pelvis. And then working the hip flexors, Anna, great point. It's totally understandable that if a muscle is short and tight, you're like, why would I work this? But if it's short and tight in a dysfunctional position, it's not doing anybody any favors. So we want to make sure that the pelvis is neutral and that the femur, when you're sitting in a chair, we are not only saying to make sure that you have the pelvis neutral, but also you don't want to be sitting with your legs splayed out necessarily either, or, as Mike was talking about with the external rotation of the femur, having your femurs neutral and then making sure your pelvis is neutral on top of that is absolutely going to help with retraining your hip flexors to support your trunk in a more neutral position, from a more neutral position of leverage. Anytime we're looking to work the hip flexors, it is from a more neutral position of leverage so that when you're sitting, standing, doing any other exercise, your psoas absolutely knows how to support you and stabilize you versus working from a compensatory position. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. And one other thing too to keep in mind, one misconception that I feel like people have is that if a muscle is tight, it's doing its job correctly and it's pretty strong.
I was talking about this yesterday. Yes. Okay.
So sometimes if the body is weak in a certain muscle, instead of not engaging that muscle at all, and your body's like, whoa, we need this to be on, it's going to tighten up to give it some type of strength. If it doesn't have the muscle strength behind it, it's going to tighten up to give you stability in that muscle. With the downside, you can't move it. So sometimes working on those muscles that are perceived as tight, making them work in a good position, like you said, hip neutral, can allow your body's like, oh, okay, I have the strength now in this muscle. I can relax. I can let go. I'm trusting that it's going to do its job. Yeah. And I won't have to dive that hip forward.
Yeah. Well, and then you're working from an increased range of motion too. It's not short and tight. This also mirrors the whole concept of like bracing your abs. Like keeping them engaged means that now your spine or your abs are, I don't know the word I use, but I think like rigid. Like now it's like stuck and tight, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily strong. So that's the same with short, tight hip flexors are not strong, neutral hip flexors.
That's right. Yeah, exactly right. Like one other example that we could give is if you observe someone standing in a knock-kneed position, so the knees are closer than their hips and their feet splay back out,
Mhm.
one way, depending on the person, that you can correct that is working on the inner thighs. Especially if one hip is higher, there's going to
Mm.
be a difference in length between those muscles. So if you think knees are coming in, we shouldn't work on those muscles at all. No, you put the leg in a neutral position, hip neutral, knees at a good length to apart from each other, then you work on those muscles. They take on the proper position, they work more functionally, and that can help work on these imbalances that we see.
Yeah, what you were saying about like if one hip's higher than the other, it's that seesaw idea. So then when that hip is higher, this adductor will be shorter than this one. So not helpful. Then when you do say sitting knee squeezes like you said, and then your hips are more level, already you're not just impacting this adductor group, you're impacting the others as well because they're working more balanced
That's right.
in relation to each other.
That's right. Yeah.
It's amazing how all these topics start to like weave into a quilt of one similar topic.
Just one question. I think we went over two questions, but there's so many different threads that we can explore in each question. It could go for forever.
It really could. Yeah. But I think those are we covered a lot of ground with that.
Mm-hmm.
With
Mm-hmm.
the threads. Do you have any sort of closing thoughts or inspirational messages for our audience before we sign off?
I would say, keep thinking about what your body's doing. Never stop asking why what's going on, or why this is happening, or what can I do. Keep that curious mind going. Your body is an amazing machine. It can change very quickly given the right circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're dealing with pain or a limit in one area, ask yourself what is not doing its job,
Mm-hmm.
because it's usually not where your pain is.
Mm-hmm.
So like you said, get curious about where else is not quite working, and we tend to ignore it, like, oh yeah, well I always roll this ankle, but it's not related, like chances are it's related.
Mm-hmm.